This is the Global Rewire Podcast. If you're like me, you turn on CNBC most days, and while it's nice to hear about Home Depot earnings, and in the background, there is always this strong sense, a new sense, of government reaching into the economy or its institutions like never before. And let's remember, this is a government of Republicans who traditionally are free marketeers. Maybe it's not so surprising, but we're going to puzzle this out with today's guest, who has studied the risks to capitalism while also being something of a critic of its results, such as economic concentration. His name is Luigi Zingales. He's a professor at the University of Chicago. He has his own podcast called Capitalism, and he's an author of a book called Saving Capitalism from Capitalists. All this reminds me of Schumpeter, the contradictions of capitalism, so this should be fun. My co-host is Fabio Nattalucci, and I'm going to remind everybody, since we're talking about current actions by the administration, that we're independent. We're not funded by political parties or their interest groups in any way whatsoever. So, Fabio, take it away.
Thank you, and thank you, Luigi, for participating. Maybe as a big question to start the discussion is just, what is your take on where we are today and how we got here in terms of how you think about the state of U.S. capitalism in the U.S.? How we got to this point where we are today, where there's discussion of U.S. government taking stakes in specific sector and a more direct intervention that, as a European who has lived in the U.S. for almost 30 years, it looks increasingly more European to me in some of the approach to the economy.
Yeah, in fact, I wrote a book more than 10 years ago where part of the narrative was that as an Italian, I left Italy with all these problems, and then I came to the United States, and the United States looks more and more like Italy without the good food and wine. And I wrote it more than 10 years ago, and I have to say that even afterward, things have gone so much in that direction that surprises even me. I didn't really understand the inside of that, but I think that now we're even past that level. But to try to take a more serious way to answer your question, I think that if you ask the question from long term, how did we come here? I think that there has been a lack of attention, and we economists share some of blame, lack of attention for distributional issues that have become quite important over the long term. And this has created a very big demand for populism. In fact, one of the things I'm most proud is in this book, it's called Capitalism for the People, and written, believe it or not, in 2012, when Romney was running for president. I say that that populism is inevitable, and the question is which form it will take. And at the time, I was trying to indicate a positive form. Clearly has taken a negative form. So I think that if we are here in this moment is in part because we ignore those issues. But I think that my simple line is that Trump and the Trump administration seems to systematically give the wrong solution to the right questions. I think that the previous administration probably had the right solution to the wrong questions. And so in some sense, you can give the credit to at least recognize where the problems are. The way they're going about it is, in my way, completely counterproductive, even for the goal they claim to achieve. But we can discuss this when we go along.
One of the best parts about working at the Institute are the discussions we have internally. And one thing we're talking a lot about is regime shifting. So if the world is kind of balkanizing now into trading blocks as a result of us kind of declaring an end to globalization and not wanting to dictate the terms of trade or anymore, don't we need to take care of our own strategic industries?
There is nothing bad in thinking about the strategic industries. And I think that, first of all, the deterioration of the relation with China and even COVID itself exposed the importance of having some industries. If you remember, at some point, even in Europe, the people were not sharing masks across borders, which is really appalling since they claim they are a union, even if they're not, but at least that's a preamble. So I think that the importance of some domestic industries is definitely there. And I think that the traditional liberal or neoliberal Washington consensus had been ignore that for a long time. And I think it's perfectly reasonable. That's one of the points I say it's the right question, because I think that we need to consider that seriously. I'm not so sure that the policies in place are necessarily the best way to do it. And it says whether you like it or not, but the subsidies that Biden put, for example, for the microchips industry, is a way. I'm not so sure is the perfect way, but is a way to address them. I think that the random tariffs, because at this point we should speak about random tariffs, the random tariffs are really not the way to address that, because first of all, they change morning to afternoon, plus they are now under the shadow of not being legal. So it's really add an element of uncertainty that we know jeopardizes any kind of investment. So if there is one lesson that I would say 99% of economists will agree on, is that increasing uncertainties reduces investments. And what the Trump administration has succeeded in doing it is in maximizing uncertainty.
Following up on this, right? So I think there's a distinction between the political objective, whatever your strategic industries are, right? Whether it's in the chips, whether this is renewable, different political parties can have different views. I think the distinction between the two approaches is also the process, right? So the previous administration had a process, there was legislation in place, there were subsidies, there were grants, loans. I think what investors are also grappling with here is the lack of a process to this, like you call it randomness, if you want. But that's governance structure, right? If you think that taking a direct stake in Intel or US Steel, what is the governance in place? What is there an exit point? So to me, that's another point of differentiation between the two approaches. Maybe it's a different way to say what you said, Luigi.
I would like to say that it's more like a quantum jump in a common trend of decline rather than there are the good and bad. And this is, I think, executive actions are not new to Trump, and the Biden administration did the crazy stuff like unilateral forgiveness of student loans. So I don't think that anybody is in the position to say we are perfect, the other side are terrible. This said, I think that we have made a jump down, a quantum jump down on process. And I'm actually, this is where I started with, I'm much more open than most people to different objectives that the Trump administration is pursuing. And we can discuss those objectives, but that's not my quarrel with the Trump administration. My quarrel is entirely in the process, which really undermines first of all, undermines even the objective, but also undermines the institutional setup with enormous negative long-term consequences.
I want to revisit this quote. I think it was from your commencement speech. You quoted Senator John Sherman. If we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over production, transportation, and sale of any necessaries of life. Okay, so the GPU market, which runs everything from video games to AI, I think is about it's like, well, hold on, I'll have the number. It's very large, and it's mainly 48 billion dollars. Okay, there's one king in that market, Nvidia, one king. The semiconductor market is about $500 billion. There is one company that owns about 60% of that market, Taiwan Semi. By the way, it sits on a tiny island right next to China. So, Luigi, like, you've thought about this. How can we introduce more competition into this arena? And why does capitalism always result in these winner-take-all positions?
First of all, I distinguish very much a situation in which you have a temporary monopoly due to technological advantages that had been achieved through a lot of hard work, versus a situation in which you exploit legal or non-legal mechanisms to delay entry of competitors. I think that clearly, from a military point of view, the location of all that production in one place was silly, and I think was stupid of us to let it happen. But I think that in a world where knowledge is becoming the critical factors, I think that it is easier to create some situation where some firms have a unique comparative advantage, and it's difficult to compete with them, even if not impossible. I think that we were fighting, and I was fighting against Google's monopolies, but as we know, I think AI is probably will undermine a lot of it. So I think it was a temporary monopoly, not a permanent monopoly. But I think that there is no doubt that technology often have increased returns to scales, or some network externalities, or some situation that creates monopolies. The question is, what do we do politically? And this is in the United States, the movement, the antitrust movement, was born to fight railways, because railways were the first instance of very much network externalities. And so I think that it's not surprising that you have that. What is surprising is how little we have done to moderate that.
Can I make a comparison? One comparison that has been made by some is with previous episodes where government took direct control of specific industries, like the auto industry, for example, during the GFC, or another example, like the airline industries. How do you see the comparison between those and what we see now in more specific technological sectors?
I'm not a big fan of government intervention to rescue firms, but in some situations you can see that a little bit like in the case of banks, where you might fear that there is a run and some valuable human capital is dissipated as a result of the run. The same can be true in, for example, for General Motors, where things look like they were going down the tube, maybe prematurely, because at the end of the day, GM is still around, and even Chrysler, believe it or not, is still around, that people did not expect. So I'm not a fan of that, but I can see a justification for that. I find it much less easy to justify random investments in Intel after you attack the CEO for his alleged sort of conflict of interest, which might be true, might be not, I don't know. Or even the payment that NVIDIA have to make to the US government. They look like shakedowns, more like of a traditional mafia style, rather than organized government action. And again, if there was a clear plan, maybe this stuff makes sense. It's just, and maybe there is a grandiose way in which I cannot understand. Honestly, the only way I can rationalize this is to see that Trump wants to show his power in every side of the economy, and so he's trying to maximize his power. That's the only logic I can see that can explain everything that takes place is this one. And maybe I don't have enough of a big vision to understand the grand scheme, and I'm open to suggestion, but that's my only explanation.
I'm going to go back to this point because I don't think we dove into it deeply enough. So you're in this Schumpeterian capitalism, and you're in a situation of globalization, and you've let certain industries go. And then suddenly, a populist leader decides, no, we're going to shift the global arrangement. There's going to be a regime shift. And we're not going to outsource as much as we did. In fact, we're going to be in a trade war with these partners. Let me give you an example, okay? Light tech warfare. You know how hard it is to find styrofoam molding in the United States today? It's nearly impossible. And if that's where warfare is going, with styrofoam drones and the like, we don't have the means of production. So what's the answer to this, Luigi? Should we make more investments as a government, or how do we sort of readjust our industry if we're going to be at war in trade terms with the rest of the world?
Hopefully, we're not at war with the entire world, okay? So generally in a war, you have an enemy and you have allies, and you have to decide ahead of time who is the enemy and who are the allies. So, and you have to pick what is strategic, what is not strategic. I don't think that repatriating in the United States Indonesian T-shirts is really a very useful thing to do. I am not a military expert, so I don't know what is strategic or is not strategic, but I'm a reader of history, and I know that in the years before World War II, when the United States were not involved and not even declared that they could potentially be involved in World War II, however, important steps were done to try to build our military capacity. And so you had a bunch of experts recommending what were the strategic industries. There were investments made in the strategic industries and so on and so forth. I'm very open to these ideas. And maybe they're done in such a secret, and all this randomness is a strategic camouflage that they're doing. And if that's the case, kudos, because the camouflage looks fantastic, and nobody can understand anything. So at least I cannot. Maybe somebody who's smarter than me can. But so in that sense, I'm open to that possibility. But honestly, I don't see a clear line. So example, if you really think you are at war with, or potentially at war with China, a natural ally is India. And so 50% ties to India that clearly push Modi in the hands of Xi Jinping. They don't make any sense to me, honestly. And again, maybe it's part of this super sophisticated camouflage, but otherwise I can't understand them.
Can I go back to the international experience, for example, maybe taking Europe as an example? Eventually, political parties change in power, and different political parties have different priorities in terms of sector, for example, that they may consider national security or relevant for other political objective. The experience in Europe has been that once you step into government intervention, government management of the economy, you tend to continue to expand, right? Beyond one sector, beyond another sector. Italy post-World War II, I think, is a good example to that. Do you see this evolving in that direction, or do you think the structure of U.S. economy, the capitalistic approach, the capital markets, very different from Europe? will prevent that, or is there a risk that this is heading in that direction?
The only solution, in my view, is to have a reason to intervene. For many years in Italy, I fought against the generic use of strategic for everything. At some point, when a French company bought Parmalat, they started to say that was strategic to defend the Italian milk. And I think that it should be illegal if you believe in the European Union. It should be illegal to call French foreigners, number one, and number two. Again, if you're starving, milk is important, but at that point, everything is strategic. Okay, so you need to pick and choose. Now, the French, on their part, block the acquisition of a shipping company by Italy. And that's a little bit more scary because, again, you would like in Europe to think that the defense is common and is not French against Italians.
Yeah, I have the same experience with banking too. Some of the cross-border banking merger being blocked for
Absolutely,
political
absolutely.
reasons.
So I think that unfortunately, the strategic motive has been so much abused that it's very easy to dismiss them all. And I am the first one to be accused of being, in the past, too dismissive of the strategic motive precisely as a reaction of this overuse. And it doesn't mean that occasionally you don't want to do it. And I think that, as Craig said, when it comes to microchips, that's really, really important. Sometimes even sort of component of microchips, they're really, really important. So I think that the solution, in my view, is to have a serious ex-ante determination of what we consider strategic, to have an open discussion about what is considered strategic, and then to implement that strategy rather than leaving the full discretion to a president who tend to be fairly volatile anyway. And so that will create an enormous level of uncertainty that, as I said at the beginning, is not really helpful to anybody.
And to keep it bipartisan, again, the next president could have very different priorities in terms of what is strategic or not, right? And then the lines start getting very, very blurry. I think what markets are not good at, it's forecasting, though, this regime change. So if you are an investor here, how do you price this uncertainty? How do you price the risk of more aggressive government management into the economy when a loan can turn into an equity stake, diluting the existing equity investor? What is your view on how this could or should be priced in markets?
Unfortunately, I don't think that there is so much need of firms to hedge, because they hedge, they do a real hedge, which is they influence the government. So I think that the best way to do it is to make sure that the subsidies are always added and never subtracted. So we see that the Trump administration really dislike all the subsidies given to alternative energy, but even given to oil. And then we see that the oil executives are first to say, yeah, you can change the Inflation Reduction Act, but you leave us the subsidies. So I think that unfortunately, this constant government interference leads CEOs to spend more time in Washington and to invest more rather than less in lobbying as a necessity. And as I say, if you have a government that leaves you alone most of the time, unless you're really a rent seeker, you're not going to try to lobby very hard. But with a government so volatile, it's foolish not to protect yourself with some degree of government interference. And then we're really in the realm of an arms race in terms of who spends more resources and who influences the government the most.
Would you expect some of these policies to persist into the next administration, no matter what party? Could even be Democrat. There's an expression that the economics are an expression of the politics. And if, like Fabio always says, let's focus on what's persistent. if the world's changing and carving up into blocks, then the next party in power is going to have to deal with that. So would you expect a similar focus on strategic industries? Maybe it takes a different form. Maybe there's more transparency. What do you expect to continue out of all this?
Again, strategy might be different. And it says, I think that alienating the relationship with Europe is not necessarily a strategy that the next administration would follow. I understand that the focus of U.S. policy has been increasingly toward Asia and decreasingly toward Europe. I think that it started back with Obama, so it's not a recent phenomenon. However, the acceleration that Trump put and also the conflictuality he put with the European allies is really, if you want, a self-imposed regime change that has very little to do with the disintegration of globalization. And again, I think that to my point of the wrong answer to the right question, should the European allies have paid and should they pay in the future more for their defense of the? Absolutely. It was the president of the United States justified to push them? Yes. Does it need to do in this way that is really kind of counterproductive? Because honestly, if I were an advisor to Merz or to some European leader, I would start saying, look, maybe the right alliance is with China. Because at the end of the day, Europe has no territorial dispute with China. It's not, and there is a lot of potential integration from an industrial point of view. And, if the alliances are changing, why not go in that direction? And I don't think that the United States would benefit from having a Europe allied with China. But I think that really the strength is the actions push in that direction. And the more Trump gets allied with Putin, the more the natural alliance of Europe is with China.
Can I ask a slightly different question from a different angle, following up on your point about that lobbying would become part of the of the objective function of the CEOs? Do you think that is going to come at the cost of innovation in the US, for example? Right. So at some point, you're going to invest in different places. Maybe competition will be less efficient as it used to be in the past. Do you think it's going to affect innovation in the US?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, first of all, there are only 24 hours in a day. And if you are the CEO, you have to prioritize what to do. And if the most important priority is your lobbying, you're going to invest less of your attention and resources into thinking about innovation. And second, since we share a common origin, look at Italy. Italy stopped growing when the large entrepreneurs were given the opportunity to make money easily by buying utilities and lobbying the government. Benetton used to be the leader of innovation in textile and sweaters, etc. Now, the brand is completely a disaster, and all the money of the Benetton family has been made with highways and snacks along the autogrill. And those are a result of privatization and lobbying the government. So, and you can say the same thing about most of the other big entrepreneurs. So I think that is really poisonous because at the end of the day, people dedicate their resources where the reward is the highest. And if the highest reward is in lobbying, they're going to do lobbying rather than innovation.
Maybe I'll ask one last question in terms of forecasting. You mentioned at the beginning of your book, Capitalism for the People. I know more than 10 years ago, you forecasted the direction of travel. So I'm going to ask you where we are now in 2025. Where do you see the direction of travel being like in 2035?
I think that we are approaching a point of no return. I think that in the second Trump administration, not the first one so much, but the second, is really eroding some the rule of law and some norms that were deeply ingrained in the U.S. institutional system and deeply necessary for a capitalist system to function. And I think that it's very easy to erode those norms. It's very difficult to rebuild them. I remember that Luigi Einaudi used to say that savers are like birds. It's very easy to scare them. It's very difficult to bring them back. And I think that that's a very useful metaphor to say how difficult it is to make a good capitalist economy working. And the first rule is to create trust. And I think that the United States benefits from a long history of success. And so the trust is stronger than we as Italian-born economists have, because in Italy you don't have a lot of trust. But this reservoir doesn't last forever. And when it's exhausted, what people don't fully appreciate is when it's exhausted, cannot be rebuilt overnight. I think that it's much easier to rebuild building and highways and etc. than to rebuild the trust. And so I think that either we find a way to stop this slippery slope, or I think that in 10 years we're going to be in a much worse situation than we are today.
Well, on that positive note, we're going to thank Luigi Zingales, University of Chicago professor, author, expert on capitalism, and tune into his podcast, Capitalism Isn't. Capital isn't?
Capital isn't. What is working in capitalism and what isn't.
What isn't? Okay. Thanks, Luigi.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.